to Everyday Orthodox. Thanks for joining us tonight. I am Elisa Bielatich-Davis, and we get together here on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. I think it's a beautiful thing to get to know the other members of the body of Christ. We are in the North America, we Orthodox are kind of spread out, right? We're spread between different jurisdictions. We worship in different languages, on different calendars sometimes, and we don't generally know each other. Like I'll find that, if you go to a Greek parish, you probably know a lot of the people at the Greek parish, but do you know everybody at the Antiochian parish and the Russian parish and the Romanian parish, right? Like there are a lot of different jurisdictions. And we don't always cross paths enough. And so I think we need to mix it up a little bit more. And so this is a little contribution to that. Let's mix it up a little bit and just get to know a whole bunch of different Orthodox people. So just drop by every week. It's kind of like if you're in coffee hour and you just sit down next to someone and say, so where are you from originally? And then they just start telling you and you just ask questions. And before you know it, you've learned their whole story. And I'll tell you what, if you do that, even at your own parish, you will probably be surprised by some of the things that you learn about the people around you, because I'm telling you what, Orthodox people have had some pretty interesting lives. And so I've got the best job in the world. I'm just here talking to different people every week. And I'm so glad that you joined me. Matushka Trudy Richter is right here tonight producing the show. If you have any questions for our guests, you can actually leave a comment on the YouTube feed. If you leave it in the YouTube chat, then Matushka Trudy will tell me what your question is and I'll ask it. But so we are live on YouTube. We stream on the Ancient Faith Ministries channel. So you can see like the video with our faces on it if you like. You can stream us also on the Ancient Faith website or on the AFR app. And of course, that's just audio. And you can also stream us on Facebook Live. And also, if you miss a live show, you can also go back and listen in the archives. We have lots of podcast archives. We have archives going back to 2017, a whole lot of really fascinating people. So, if you have a long drive or something, you need something to listen to, there's some pretty cool people on there. But all right, without any further ado, let me tell you about our awesome guest. I actually met her, I think we decided just over 2 years ago.
Yes,
at the Ancient Faith. That's right? Yeah. Ancient Faith. Ancient Faith did a content creators conference, and I don't know if they'll be able to do another one, but they're the neatest thing because we just got together creative Orthodox people, and it was like, well, if you're already writing, if you're not writing yet, but you want to write something, if you're an illustrator, whoever you are, come in and talk to us. And Rheta Thola came to the Ancient Faith Content Creators Retreat at Antiochian Village. And she's lovely, and we had a great time. And it happened that she told me about a book she wanted to write. And I'll tell you what, that book exists. Like, that is a real book now. You may have seen it. It's called Stubborn Love, A Story of St. Maria of Paris. And of course, I loved talking to Rheta about it because St. Maria of Paris is just about one of the best modern saints going. She's fascinating. She's really an interesting person. And she's one of those saints that doesn't always act, gentle and sweet. She's kind of unpredictable, which I love about her. But at any rate, so Rheta lives in Pennsylvania. She lives up in the mountains with her husband, 2 children, and several cats. She loves spending time reading and watching old TV shows. She likes to be outside and explore small towns. I'm also a fan of this, so you can see why we get along. But truthfully, she just really likes going to church services. And, me too. So there you go. But she leads the youth program at her church, and she's blessed to have a goddaughter to pray for and to help raise in the faith. So I just want you to get to know Rheta because she is delightful, and I think you're going to enjoy her. So without any further ado, Rheta, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's so much fun to talk to you again and to be on your program.
It's so great. We talked about this 2 years ago. I was like, well,
I know.
The book, and then you'll come on the show and you'll tell us about the book and it'll give us an excuse to hang out. And it worked.
There you go.
My plan worked.
Just took 2 years.
All you had to do was write a book. I definitely got the easy part of it. But, Rheta, now tell me, where does your story start? Have you always lived in Pennsylvania?
So I actually grew up in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes area. And it was, a house on a dirt road in the middle of the woods, with my parents owning a bunch of woods and then my grandparents owning a bunch of connecting land. So almost kind of like we owned a good portion of the land, the dirt road, and just, you didn't get any, back then, if you wanted to watch TV, you had to have an antenna, right? So like even with an antenna, we didn't get any TV channels on our TV. I tell the kids about like, when it snowed, we couldn't get out of our driveway in the snow. So we would walk up the driveway to where we parked our vehicle on the side of the road to drive to the store. So yeah, a lot of time just outside, doing things outside for fun. And yeah.
That's neat. Out of curiosity, and I don't know why this popped into my head, but I grew up similarly. And I'm curious because we didn't have snow. We were in California, but we were out in the middle of just nowhere and long driveway into the woods before you could find our house. So, which I think is the best way to have a house personally. Like I miss it. But, did you run into problems where like the electricity would go out and you were like the last ones they'd turn on because you were so rural? Was that a problem for you guys like it was for us?
So I have a feeling we probably did lose electricity a lot. We had a wood stove, so it didn't really matter if the power went out because you could still heat the house and you could still cook on it. So, 2 problems solved. And as a kid, we loved the power going out. So it was kind of
my favorite
thing. So much fun.
And it was funny because other people's power goes out for like 3 hours and we'd be like, no, our power was out for a week.
Right.
It's fine. We had a wood stove. Everybody had wood stoves and like kerosene lamps. And it was just like, yeah, whatever. It's fine. Just go read a book. It's nice and quiet.
Right.
It's a beautiful way to grow up. So you played outside a lot. Did you have siblings to play with or were you the only kid around?
I had an older sister. She's 1 year older than me. So we were both homeschooled for most of my school age time. So we were pretty much always doing the same things together. Everybody who bought like clothes for us had to buy, matching sweaters and all the matching dresses, right? That sort of thing.
Yes. Oh, that's adorable. That's so cute. How many years apart were you?
1 year.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yep.
So so your mom just kept her girls at home and taught them.
Yes.
So what a blast for her too. That's beautiful.
Yes.
That's really neat. So what kinds of things did you like? Were you guys involved in extracurriculars outside the house or was it more just like you guys running around in the woods?
So we really weren't involved in a lot outside of the home. My parents had one vehicle when I was growing up and my dad had to travel about an hour to an hour and a half for work every day. So so we just spent a lot of time outside and we'd hike to different places to do school outside, things like that. So it was a lot of fun and I really enjoyed it. I still enjoy, hence why we live in Pennsylvania, just being in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's neat. Well, and there are a lot of really beautiful areas in Pennsylvania. I mean, the mountains out there are they're just wonderful. That's neat. So as a kid, I can't quite imagine that. You must have just been snowed in a lot because upstate New York is a pretty snowy place. It's a pretty cold place. All right, then. Okay. So as you got older, like what were your favorite things to do? Like what did you see yourself shaping into kind of professionally? Not that you needed a profession at that time, but I know as kids we're always like, oh, I'm going to be whatever. I'm going to be an astronaut. What were you going to be?
So I took a big interest into history, specifically Russian history. And so it kind of started, I found this really old book and it was about one of the Bible smugglers who smuggled Bibles into Russia during the communist period. And I was just fascinated by that because that was something so unique and different from what our experience is in America, right? And so that spurred a lot of questions of like, is this still going on today? Like, is Russia still communist? Like, what is going on? So then I did a deep dive into history, specifically Russian history, Russian culture, just kind of like dovetailed into a bunch of different things Russian related, Russian literature, all that sort of stuff. That was my hobby in like middle school and high school, as weird as it sounds. So where that ended up leading was at one point I wanted to become a diplomat. I wanted to work in diplomacy and international affairs.
Okay. And that would sort of make sense. You're like, well, somebody's got to talk to the Russians and I'm clearly qualified now that I understand them so thoroughly. But so you're reading a book about a Bible smuggler. Were you Christian growing up? Were you Orthodox growing up? Is that like, was it a religious reason that your parents wanted to homeschool you? Like, what was sort of your, I don't know, religious outlook as a kid?
So I was raised Protestant, and I leave it at Protestant because we had joined different churches at different times. I was actually baptized Lutheran as a small child. Eventually, my parents went to a Baptist church and was rebaptized as a Baptist. And around my preteen years, my mom and dad had marital problems and they stopped going to church, but they still wanted us to practice the faith. So they sent me to a Baptist private school for a few years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's where I encountered the book about the Bible smuggler. And it was definitely a nurturing environment in the faith of just being able to be around people that, God, talking about God was normal, talking about your faith was normal. And then as I got older teenage years and young adulthood, I ended up in a lot more of the non-denominational and charismatic churches.
So, so when your mom stopped homeschooling you, first of all, that's a big deal to switch over to public schools, or not public schools, to the Baptist school. So it's maybe not as bad.
Yep.
As I think about it, it could have been worse, right? It could have been worse if you're in the public schools. And certainly if it were more urban or something, right? But so was that, do you think she would have put you guys in school because you were getting older and she wanted to do that? Or do you really feel like it was just like, maybe things were just getting too hard for her and that was enough. It was just that moment when she was done.
I think it was just that it was getting harder. She ended up getting a job, so she had to work. And so she wasn't home with us anymore. But I did end up finishing my high school technically as homeschooled. So 11th and 12th grade, I did a homeschool program, which at that time was on CD-ROMs. You would take a CD-ROM, you would fill it out, complete it, save all the information to it, and mail it off to a teacher, so like the idea of like online school, but before online school could happen.
Right. It was like,
so that's what I did for 11th and 12th grade. Yes.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's neat. Yeah. Cause you've got your written correspondence, which I was trying to explain to my kids recently. I was like, well, they would send you like a manila envelope of paper and you would just do it all and send it back. But so it's still like that. There's an envelope that you're still mailing, but there's a CD-ROM in it now.
CD-ROM,
so very futuristic, very futuristic.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So how did you like school, like when you switched, because you kind of, if you were happy and then mom had to get a job, I could imagine at that age being a little bitter about it, honestly, because kids that age do get a little bitter sometimes.
Yeah. I would say it was really tough for me. Also at that time, my grandmother, my mother's mother, was diagnosed with really advanced cancer. So she was also very sick. So my mom was trying to take care of her. So there was just a lot going on. And the one thing that I really appreciated was, up until that point, my faith was always there, but it was never really important, right? It was just what you do. But then when all this started going on, that's what I knew I had, right? So like I knew I had faith. I knew God loved me. I knew regardless of all the chaos that was going on, that's one thing that was for sure. And so that was, no one enjoys going through hard times, but I feel like that really cemented my faith of just like, there is this hard time. And now I really understand why your faith matters so much and why God matters so much. So it was hard. But I got through it.
Well, and it's interesting because as parents, I'm sure your mom felt terrible that you were having to go to, that you were making this change and that you weren't happy about it and whatever, right? Like any day that you came home and were like, ugh, these kids, she's like, no. But as parents, we don't want to see that, right? We don't want our kids to struggle. But the truth is we want our kids to grow up with faith. And it's real hard to develop solid faith if you don't go through some struggles, because there's just something about it, right? There's just something about our nature. We're not good at really understanding how much we need God until he shows us a little bit,
Right.
But,
and that's like reading about the Bible smugglers just really fit so well with that, of just seeing other people struggle and seeing how powerful their faith was. Like, my chaotic household was nothing compared to, being put in prison or things like that. So
Yeah.
it was really a well-timed encouragement for me to discover that story.
That's neat. That's really neat. So did you end up staying in the Baptist church no, you said you switched over to non-denominational, so you were kind of moving around. Okay. But so
Yes.
now, as you're studying all this Russian stuff and the Bibles are, well, of course, it's Bible smugglers coming in. So they're probably like with Protestant groups, right?
Yes.
They're not
Yes.
Orthodox smugglers coming in, because they'd be smuggling in prayer books and liturgy books and all kinds of other stuff too, right? And, but so you, all of this interest in Russia, no orthodoxy on the horizon yet?
So I studied it in the aspect of trying to briefly understand it, but it made about as much sense to me as Catholicism did, which made no sense at all. And being raised as a very good Baptist, it was kind of the like, Catholics don't believe in the right thing, right? Like, so as a Baptist, this is what you believe in. So I knew enough about it that it existed, but I never really thought it was anything that would be applicable to me.
Right. Right.
And being, or even that it would be a good
idea for anyone anywhere to try it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, because, coming from that perspective, right, it is just so different and so strange.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
For sure.
All right. So then for the end of high school, you end up homeschooling again the last couple of years, but by CD-ROM. And
yes.
So that's just so funny. I don't know why that cracks me up. There's just something so cute about it, right? It's like, oh, look, we're going to be high tech now. But, and it was high tech, you could record to a CD. It was neat. But, so what did you do when you graduated? What did you do when you were finished? Did you want to leave or did you want to stay with your parents?
So two things kind of happened simultaneously. I ended up, well, actually, I shouldn't say simultaneously. I went to a small private college for a semester. It was actually in Pennsylvania. And part of why I went was because I desperately wanted like a community, right? Because I had graduated without a graduating class. That's one of the downsides of being homeschooled. At that time, like I wasn't part of a church. My parents weren't going to church. So I really wanted community. So I was like, college is where I'll find community. And I get there and I'm just like, probably very prideful. I was like, nobody is taking this seriously. No one is in classes taking this seriously. No one wants to actually learn anything. There are people there who are like, how do you do your own laundry? I'm like, are you kidding me? Right. So I was very serious, probably very prideful person. And so I lasted one semester and I said, that's it. I'm done. I moved back home and I did college online because now we had the technology to be able to do classes online.
Wow.
So I started, So I started college online.
Is this like a dial-up modem kind of a situation? Like, did it make that sound right before you went to class?
Yes.
Nice. Very nice.
Yep. And so my degree was for political science, again, with the idea of someday getting a master's in diplomacy.
Okay. But so back at home, I mean, but so then you didn't really have a community again for those years.
Correct.
Yes. Well, that's
Yep. So while I was doing that, I ended up flying out to see my best friend who lived in New Mexico at the time, and I met my future husband. So then I moved to Alaska with him. He was in the Army. And so we were married for the 4 years that I was doing my college online. And then we...
Oh, you were young. How old were you? Did you get married at 18?
I think I was 19.
Wow. Okay. So you had one semester of school under Pennsylvania, under your belt, left, went to how long did you know him when you went? Because how long did you were visiting your friend?
Not very long.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
So, well, yeah, I predict that this is going to go very well. So you're 19. And your parents, I'm sure, were delighted. They were like, we can't do anything better than you meeting some random Army guy and moving to Alaska.
Right. Yep. Yeah. That didn't go well. But they tried to be very loving, right? Of the like, this is not the decision we would make for you, but this is your decision, right? And you
Yeah.
are still our daughter, and we will love you no matter what. So,
Yeah.
which was wonderful
Right.
because they were there for me when it all fell through. So that was, and it again brought me like it during that period. I did not have a very strong relationship with my dad. We talked, but we were not very close. And when my marriage started falling through, that's when my relationship with my dad really increased. So again, like struggles aren't great, and nobody looks forward to them, but I'm able to look at them and see just really truly beautiful things that come from it.
Absolutely. That's neat. What was it like in Alaska? I mean, I guess part of the question is, were there a lot of guys who were married, so you got to hang out with the other wives? Did you at least have a community up there? Or was it like, no, I was the only one? It was all quiet still.
So there was a good community.
Good.
I had a really hard time adjusting with kind of that identity though of the like, now you're an army wife, this is what you should be like, this is how the things you should be interested in, and I'm just like, that's not me. Like, I don't want to be restricted and put into this stereotype. So that was really hard for me, but I will say Alaska is the first place that I encountered orthodoxy, and
Oh,
I look
cool.
back on it and I'm like, I hate that I was in Alaska and not Orthodox at the time, because now I like, hear all these wonderful stories about these wonderful Orthodox saints that you can go to and, visit in Alaska. And I'm like, I was in Orthodox at the time. So I'm like, someday I will go back to Alaska
I know.
and this time be Orthodox.
I grew up near San Francisco, and everybody, or not very,
Mm,
several hours, but people are always like, oh, Northern California. Oh, you probably went and saw St. John all the time. Like, I had no idea who that was when I lived there. Like,
right.
never, ever would have occurred to me. I probably drove past plenty of times. It is sort of sad because it's a lost opportunity for sure.
Yes.
And Alaska is such a rich history. So in what ways did
Mhm.
you encounter Orthodoxy in Alaska then? What did you stumble
Yeah.
across?
So there was this very small museum that was in downtown Anchorage, and it was a Russian history museum. And the museum part itself was maybe the size of like a trailer, like very small. But then off of that, they had an Orthodox chapel. And so you could walk into the chapel, there were icons. It was a genuine Orthodox chapel. I don't know if they had services there. Like, again, I wasn't Orthodox, so I had no clue about this. But you walked in and you knew there's something different, right? Like you walked in and it was peaceful. It was a place where you knew you weren't supposed to be loud and crazy, right? Like you just felt that that place was sacred. Um, and so that was my first experience with Orthodoxy, of just the like, I don't know what this place is. I don't know why it looks like this, but it's just different.
There you go. Well, and Alaska was probably full of different things. I mean, that's a
Hmm.
really, that's a lot of culture shock, right? I
Yes.
mean, how was it? I mean, you came from a cold place. So
Hmm.
what do you think? Is it way colder in Alaska? Like, is it just completely different than living in New York?
So I always tell people the cold didn't bother me, because I love snow. Like I love snow. I love the cold. It doesn't bother me. Once it hits like -10, it all just feels the same anyways. It doesn't matter. Um, but the summers never got super warm, which kind of was frustrating because I love like all the different seasons. And so in Anchorage, it just kind of got what we would call spring weather, right? Like it didn't really get really warm. Um, I do remember watching like 4th of July fireworks, and I'm like, why do these look so different? And it's because, it's still light at night, and it was one of the things I didn't really
Oh,
think about, but I'm like, it's still light outside and the fireworks are going off, even though it was,
yeah.
11 o'clock at night. Um,
Huh.
so I feel like the hardest cultural shock was just being in someplace so remote. New York, you're able to drive to Pennsylvania or, wherever you want to go. Another state is generally a few hours away. Whereas Alaska, you're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah,
You're just kind of there. So, yes.
that's true. That's true. All right. So then after a few years, did you finish your college degree just as your marriage was clearly ending, and it just all at the same time was like, all right, there we go. Or was it staggered?
So I finished my college degree roughly about 9 months before my marriage started falling apart. And I say roughly 9 months because that's when that's when I got pregnant with my daughter. So
Okay.
yes, yep.
Wow. So wait, so you had a daughter right as you were getting divorced? Like, was she born
Yes.
around that time? Oh.
Yes, yep, yeah.
Oh gosh, that must have
Yep.
been really hard.
It was. It was hard for me, especially being first time mom, all that sort of stuff. In some ways, it's nice that that's what she's known. So she didn't have to go through emotional difficulty of watching her parents separate and things like that. So that I feel like is a nice aspect. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
divorce is never nice, no matter what.
No, it's not. It's lousy. I'll speak from experience.
Mhm.
Not a fan, but no, but that's really especially, I would think, scary to be sort of on that precipice, so young, and feeling like, okay, well, now I'm gonna leave Alaska and I've got a baby, and here we go. I'm starting out totally different than I was 6 months ago or whatever. But so, did you go back to your parents' house?
I stayed with them for a little bit, but so at that point, we had moved to Virginia, Northern Virginia, outside of DC area. And I stayed with my parents a little bit. I stayed with some friends from church. We were actually part of a very good community in a great church, not Orthodox, Protestant, non-denominational church, but there were lots of people at the church that were just so willing to help me out. Let me stay in their basement. Let me stay in their extra bedroom. When I finally got an apartment, here's a set of dishes. Here's a car seat. What do you need? That sort of thing. I remember
That's great.
my first Christmas, they gave me lots of toys and I wrapped them up and gave them to my daughter as Christmas gifts because I'm like, here we go. I don't have to buy any gifts for her. So a lot of wonderful support.
Oh, that's great. That's really good. That's a very good moment to have suddenly found a really great community. That's God provides, right? Just in the nick of time.
Yes, He does.
Wow. Okay. All right. So then how long did that go? I guess what was the trajectory there? What were you up to? And you're dealing with the baby and you're going to church, and what was the plan, I guess?
Yeah. So that was, I had to get a job. And I was outside of DC, and I figured if any place I could find a job with a political science degree, it would be DC.
Right. Makes sense.
But a lot of places wanted somebody with experience, so I didn't really get any job that was towards my goal of international relationships. But I did get a couple of jobs at some nonprofits in DC. And that was kind of like, my first job out of college, which was, a lot of fun taking the metro into DC at, 5:00 in the morning to make sure you're to work on time. Like I said, really great community. There was a lady at my church who was willing to watch my daughter for free every day while I was at work.
Oh, wow. What a blessing.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yep. So that was wonderful that I didn't have to put her in daycare, until she was older, and then she went to preschool. But that was wonderful. And so I worked in DC for almost a year. And then I found a job opening at a church, an Anglican church in Virginia. And I said, well, that will be a lot closer. And even though I'm not Anglican, it was a administration position, so I didn't actually have to be Anglican. I didn't have to attend the church. So I was like, you know what? That would be nice. Something not in DC, something that might be a little bit more flexible with being a single mom. So I made the transition there. And that's where I had ironically, my second Orthodox encounter, and that's where I met my now husband. And yeah, lots of things changed.
Wow. Yeah. It sounds like kind of a big turning point right there. I had a feeling maybe that liturgy was going to make things a little bit different, but we're going to take a short break. We will be right back with Rheta Thola, and we're going to find out exactly how things changed right about then. We'll be right back.
One of the darkest times in recent history, God gave us a saint. This saint had to be someone stubborn. stubborn enough to outshine evil even when confronted with it face to face. But how did Saint Maria become a person whom God could inspire, help, and guide during such a dark time? How did she wrestle with her own temptations and allow Christ to grow brightly in her soul? Stubborn Love by Rheta Thola is one book in 3 parts, written for young people. Her life tells the story of Mother Maria Skobtsova of Paris from birth to death. The first section of the book is accompanied by graphic novel-style illustrations to help the young reader imagine her work, family, and adventures. Her writings comes next, a smattering of some of the notes and thoughts that shaped her. Your Life is the final section, where the reader is challenged to consider his or her place in the world, using Mother Maria's life and sayings as a springboard for journal entries, and also some group study questions to answer. Pray for us, dear Mother Maria. You can find this book at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Rheta Thola, author of Stubborn Love, about Mother Maria of Paris. And we'll be talking about her book in just a few minutes. But so there you were, a very young sort of, it was a very young single mom, and you're working at this Anglican church. And it's just so funny, right? I finally discovered Orthodoxy at the Anglican church. Tell me about that.
Yes.
How does that work? What?
So about that time, I, going through divorce, being a single mom, all that sort of stuff, I was like, I want to actually do something with my life, right? Like take charge and plan things out, right? So I had like a 5-year plan, because those are great, right? And in my 5-year plan, one of the things was go to an Orthodox church, because I'm like, there's only so much you can read from a book. There's only so much you can learn. Let's do something weird and different, and let's actually go to a church.
Okay.
So whether or not that would have happened without working at this Anglican church, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would have had enough gumption. That's why it was a goal, right? Like goals are things that are hard to obtain. So I start working at this Anglican church, and the IT manager is Orthodox. And because again, if you had an administrative position, you didn't have to be Anglican. So she was attending an Orthodox church in Northern Virginia. And it took me quite a lot of courage to finally ask her, like, hey, you're Orthodox. Can you tell me about your church? And I was at that point, I was very much into, charismatic churches, stage with lights and fog machines, like that type of church experience is what I was doing. So to go from that to an Orthodox church was very different. And so she would answer my questions. And at one point she just said, the best way to learn about Orthodoxy is to come to our church. You want to come visit our church? Let me know. And I was like, okay, but you got to wait for me outside the church. I don't want to walk into the church by myself. That's how intimidated I felt by it. And that's nothing to do with the church or Orthodoxy in general. It's just, that was my perception of, this is so different. I don't know what to do.
Right.
So she did. So she waited on the front steps.
Right? There's a fear, these people all know when to cross themselves. They're,
Yes.
whatever. There's a real fear that I'm going to do the wrong thing and they're going to be mad about it. Little do you know, nobody's paying any attention, but.
Right. So she waited on the front steps and walked me in, and, I stood next to her, and it got to the point where I was going there every other Sunday, right? One Sunday I'd go to the church I was used to going to, and then one Sunday I'd go to the Orthodox church. And my daughter was 3, I think, at the time, right? And she was already crossing herself and kissing icons, and she was full into it. And the joke was she's Orthodox already. I don't know what your problem is, but your daughter's Orthodox already. Right. So it got to the point where I was just like, I don't want to keep going back and forth between two churches. Like, I like to commit to something, and that's what I like to be at, right? So
Yeah.
it's like, I'm just going to go to the Orthodox Church. So yeah, so one thing led to another, and
yeah. Well, what were you experiencing in the Orthodox Church? Like, 'cause as you're going back and forth, right? These are extremely different experiences.
Yes.
So you're going to the more charismatic, like lights and sounds and music, and this very, I don't know, like, how would you describe it? And I think about this, actually, I wonder about this a lot, because our worship is so different. Did it feel that different to you? Or did you feel like, no, I'm communing with the same God no matter where I go, no big difference? Or what did it seem like to you?
So the best way I describe it is it felt peaceful. Like, I went there, I went to the Orthodox Church, and it was peaceful. It wasn't about lights and sounds and, making the next song even more energetic. It wasn't focused on that. It was focused on just peaceful prayer. And, obviously there's kids and there's all kinds of things going on that isn't peaceful, right, in the background.
Right, yeah.
But again, that same sense is like when I went to that little tiny chapel that was part of that museum of you walk in and there's something different. And I never felt that way about any other church, right? Any other church, it felt like you walked into a building that happened to be the building where you had church service, but that was it. It's just a building. And then I would find out different things, and I'm like, before I knew it type thing. Like, I always, even as a Baptist, always loved lighting candles when I said a prayer. I'm like, the Orthodox do that. That's crazy. Like, I was being Orthodox and I didn't even know it, right? Like, I loved the idea of like praying the Psalms and singing the Psalms as prayers. And I'm like, the Orthodox Church does that, right? So like, there's these weird little things that I'm like, all this time, it was like Orthodoxy in me just didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't know that there was a church somewhere that did that. I just thought I was weird.
That's neat. That's really neat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I do feel like a lot of those things are almost instinctive things that you want to do. And, and I feel like when we grow up, sort of distrusting rituals and stuff, then we kind of try to shove it back, but it's still appealing on a very visceral level, no matter what. But I want to tell you, we have 2 comments on YouTube. One is from Rita Graham, who says, "Good evening, Rita. I'm so excited for you." And also from Moses Schaefer, who says, "Hey, that's my sister. She runs the youth group in my parish." That's beautiful.
Yes.
So I love that. But so it's clear that you are very loved. I like that very much. But okay, so you're discovering Orthodoxy, but you also met somebody pretty lovely at the parish, huh? You met a man at the parish.
Yes. Yep. So I also actually worked with him. He was the IT manager's assistant, right? So he was the minion of the Anglican Church, and he would go around and fix people's computers and people's technology problems. And I like to joke that if you ask when we first met, he met me about a year later than when I met him, because he doesn't remember it. He just remembers like computer problems. He's very much, typical computer person, right? He remembered my computer problems. He remembered those, no problem at all, right? But he's like, I didn't know that was you. And I'm like, that was me. That was my computer. So we met at work, probably before we actually met at church, because at church I was very introverted and shy, just being very unfamiliar with Orthodoxy, that sort of thing. So I wasn't very outgoing, but at work I was much more comfortable. So we would chat at work and hang out at work for a while. And, when he finally met me, and then it, took him some time, but he eventually asked me out to watch the first of the Hobbit trilogy in theaters when they were making the Peter Jackson Hobbit films, because he knew I was big into Tolkien, and so he's like, this will be a good way to get her on a date. So it worked.
I bet it did. I bet it was a great date too, because those were great movies.
It was. Yes. It was a lot of fun.
So how long did the 2 of you date before you got married? I mean,
yeah, so almost about a year.
Nice.
Yep.
And he wasn't afraid, even though you had a little girl, he wasn't freaking out about it. Or was he?
He was.
Yes.
Yeah. He is younger than me. He's 4 years younger than me. So he was considerably younger. And he actually, again, being the very like computer analytical person, he apparently made a spreadsheet of like pros and cons of dating her and being a father and all that sort of stuff. So, so he was very analytical about like, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea?
What are the pros and cons?
So,
like this could be complicated, but also maybe the little girl's nice. And lots of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. Okay. So then the two of you got, so by then, were you Orthodox also? Like then, was it an Orthodox wedding in the church in Virginia there?
Yes, it was. So what ended up happening was I was chrismated and my daughter was baptized and chrismated the day before he proposed.
Oh, wow.
So
That's
he was
timing.
very much,
nice.
Yeah. He's like, I want your conversion to Orthodoxy to be your choice, not just because we're going to get married or anything like that. So, which I really appreciate. I think that's, I think it's hard for marriages to work well if you just change your faith because of somebody else. So it was definitely 100% my decision to become Orthodox. And then we were able to jump in to the Orthodox Church.
Wow, that's neat though. So when did you guys end up moving back to Pennsylvania?
So we did that 2015. Yes.
Excellent. And why'd you do that? Because you moved to the country, right? Like, I mean, you both had nice jobs. Everything's going fine in Virginia. Mm-hmm. What did you figure out? Like, how did you move back to the country? For those people who are listening, you're like, I want to move out into the middle of nowhere, but my job and my connections and all these things, right? How did you do that?
Right. So the reason we wanted to move is I wanted my kids, because at that time I was pregnant with my son. I wanted my kids to have a backyard. I'm like, I want them to have a backyard, right? Like I grew up with kind of like a really big backyard, right? Like a couple hundred acres. Like no one has that. But like I want them to at least have a backyard so I can go outside, play outside, and they can do that. So that was the reasoning behind it. And then we were able to do it because where my husband worked at the time, he had left the church, started working for another job, left the Anglican church, started working a different IT job, and he was able to get the flexibility of working half the time remote for the week and then half the time driving into Virginia for the week. So the way it worked out is he would be in Pennsylvania, he would drive to Virginia, and his parents live in Virginia, so he'd be able to stay with them, work a couple of days, and then come back to Pennsylvania. So he lived like half and half for a while until COVID happened, and then everything changed.
And then everything was remote, and it was just fine.
Exactly. Yes.
Excellent. Oh, that's great, though. That's good. That sounds like it worked out very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at what point did you find out about Mother Maria? Because I assume you were still interested in Russian stuff, and now you were Orthodox. Mm-hmm. So was it a Russian Orthodox church that you were attending, or was it a different kind of Orthodox or different jurisdiction?
No. So the church in Virginia that I went to was a OCA church.
Okay.
And the church that
Russian, not
now,
Russian, right? Like OCA is
right.
Kind of like
Romanian, not Romanian. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And the church I attend now is Antiochian, and that was just kind of default, as in that's the closest church to where we bought a house. So,
and that's really how it should be, I think. And it's nice to. It's kind of nice to be in different jurisdictions over the years. Mm-hmm. You sort of you start to understand things a little bit better. But so were you? I guess did you feel like? It seems like originally you were thinking about Orthodoxy in part because you had been thinking so much about Russia and what is going on there. And then at some point it shifts and you're just looking at Orthodoxy as like this living thing in front of you that you might want to join. Was it still connected for you very strongly to Russia and all of your studies about Russia or your interest in Russia? Or, at what, it seems like, did they come back together? Is that how Maria got in here? Right? Like, that's what I'm going for. It's like, how does all of it work together?
So, part of becoming Orthodox, I realized, what a beautiful foundation Russia has with her faith, right? Like there was communism, and so a lot of the faith was tested and a lot of negative things happened. But my view of Russia changed a lot in the aspect of like, Russia doesn't need a bunch of people from the outside coming in telling them what to believe, right? They've already believed this for longer than most people have, so kind of my relationship, I guess, with Russia has changed a little bit, of the aspect of they don't need me, right? They don't need me as a crusader to come in and tell them that they need to find God again, right? They definitely need prayers. And, I look at, beautiful churches that have been abandoned or destroyed by communism. Like, it's heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking just because I'm Orthodox now. Like, I can see that and see it's not just a building. It's not just a, 4 walls, right? Like it was a sacred place that has been lost, right? And so a lot of prayers for Russia. Someday I would love to go there. I've been able to indoctrinate my daughter, if you will. She's like, I want to go to Russia someday. Let's go to Russia together. Mom, why don't you teach me Russian? Do you know any Russian? And I'm like, not really. But we can try to learn it together. So that's where it is. It's just same with Alaska. I'd love to go back there. In Russia, I would just love to go there someday. I think it'd be so amazing.
Yeah, I think both of those trips would be pretty amazing. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So when you discovered Mother Maria, it wasn't through the fact that she's Russian specifically. Mm-hmm. It was just, here's an interesting modern Orthodox saint.
So I actually I didn't have to. I studied her because my priest recommended it. So he wanted me to pick a saint that the youth at our church would learn about for a year.
Oh, a year is a long time.
A year. Yeah. So we meet once a month. So it was like,
Okay. So
so it wasn't
11, like 12 sessions.
Yes.
Not,
yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so he had named a couple, and honestly, because I did not know much about Mother Maria, I said, oh, she's French. She's from Paris. I'm like, that's interesting. So, I didn't even go into it knowing, yes, I didn't even go into it thinking she was Russian. But I was like, you know what? We'll pick her. That sounds good. There's at least a couple of books about her that I can read about her so I can teach the kids. And, then I was like, well, it'd be really great if the kids could read a book about her, if there was a book that they could, read through and we could do a book study on her life. And I was like, there's nothing for nothing accessible for elementary kids, nothing really, even like middle schoolers were having a hard time reading some of the books that I had found about her. And I was just like, so what do I do? So me being me, I'm like, I'll just make something. So I just started typing up just bits about her life. And I'm like, here's what you're going to read. This is your book to read. Take it home with you, read it. We're going to have discussion questions. And that's really how the book started.
That's great.
Trying to get something for the kids at church to do.
But see, I love that because the truth is that in general, for youth groups and Sunday school and programs like that, we don't always have a ton of options in Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. So people do end up writing their own curriculum all the time. And then we just like file it. I can't tell you how many like Sunday school directors retiring will be like, oh, I have all these files if you want. And it's just like, nobody's going to go through everybody's dusty files, mm-hmm. but there are gems in there. Yes. And if all of us could stop and say, maybe other people would like this too. Maybe this could be a book, and then work with an editor and go through it and turn it into something really fantastic. Like, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. That's really neat. What is it that now that you've gotten to know her, what do you like about Mother Maria? Like, what do you find really interesting about her?
So I think possibly what I like the most is also what I dislike the most, in that she's direct, straight to your face, right? Like that is who she was. And I think personally, if I met her, I don't think I'd really like her that much. Like, that's not my personality. Like, that's not what I like. But at the same time, that personality is what she needed to do what she did, right? Like that personality has such a strength to it that can change things and do amazing things, you know? So I think that's so cool. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't know, that would clash with me quite a lot. Like, and she clashed with a lot of people. So yeah.
As you're saying that, I was just looking up this quote. There's Anthony Bloom, Bishop Anthony Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you found this in your thing, right?
Yes.
When he first saw her, and I felt him. I was like, yes, sir, I'm right there with you, right? Because I love her.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, she's not someone I think is necessarily fun to hang out with, right? Because she's not, it feels like she gets mad at people a lot. It feels like she's, you know, when you're studying her life, you get a lot of like, her just saying, you know, that's ridiculous. I'm getting back to work. But he said that he was walking along the boulevard and it says, in front of a cafe on the pavement, there was a table. On the table, there was a glass of beer. And behind the glass was sitting a Russian nun in full monastic robes. I looked at her and decided I would never go near that woman. I was young then and held extreme views. He just walked away. He hid from her. He was like, I don't want anything to do with that lady. I love that so much because yeah, I think she was probably kind of scary. Really, she was. But it's delightful though. But you have some things in common with her too, though, because she was also a divorced mom, right? And so it's like this really neat thing. I don't think, you know, people realize that we have very many saints who've gone through things like that. And that's one of the unexpected things about her is she's like, well, I was young, I got married, I had a baby, I decided, nah, married somebody else. That doesn't work either. Like, it's just, right. You know, she's really struggling. And then even as a nun, you know, going to the monastery doesn't work for her. And I don't know. I mean, it's just kind of, she had to make her own path. She's really neat. She's really cool. Yeah. Do you feel like she is an especially good choice? Now, you know, you sort of chose her almost accidentally. I mean, your priest did put her on the list for a reason, right? But would you say that for some, like a person to really teach to the kids, to young people today, is she a good choice? And if so, why?
I think her story is wonderful, especially for teenagers and preteens, because I feel like her story shows so much of her struggling, grasping at different things, trying to find how to deal with life, how to deal with her problems, how to answer questions, and just constantly grabbing a hold of different things and trying to make it work. And then finally getting to the point where it's like, none of it's working. The only thing that's working is God, right? Like that's the only thing. And even with that, she still is struggling and grasping of the, like, you know, how does she interact with other nuns that come? They argue and fight and they end up leaving, right? Like she still is constantly going through all these struggles of just how to actually continue in life, especially with problems. And I feel like that's every teen anywhere can identify with that, right? You have problems. Everybody does. And what do you do with it? You know, and she's wonderfully not perfect, right? Like she just, you see that and you see how God's still able to use her, right? When she finally gives herself over to him. And I feel like that's just so encouraging for kids too, especially teens, because no teen ever starts with the perfect right answer, you know? So you grab at different things and you try to figure out different ways that it'll work and different good things even. And usually you start off thinking it's great. It's a great idea, right? Like this is a good thing to do. And you slowly realize, it's not really working out the way I thought it was going to, you know, what do I do next? And so, yeah, so I think her story just shows you keep doing it. You keep reaching for good things. You know, God is good. And eventually you're going to reach that good thing. And there's no point that you can't come back from, right? If you're still reaching out towards the good things, right? And that's where her life is just the, like, God didn't care that she got divorced multiple times. God didn't care that she had problems and denied him as a teenager, right? Like none of that matters when you reach towards God.
Yeah. She's really neat. And I think I shared that with you when we talked before, but I have a teenager who for a while there, she really loved to cook and she loves people, but she was not enjoying church at all. and she needed to do an oratorical speech. And she's like, I'm just going to say how much I hate liturgy. I'm like, yeah, that's not a good speech. But I was like, you know who you might be interested in? And I was like, you need to look up Mother Maria of Paris. And because I was talking to her about, that's one of the criticisms of Mother Maria was she wasn't in church enough. She was an iconographer. She was in the chapel. She was building things and doing things. And she was prayerful. But she, famously said, you're not judged on how many prostrations, but on whether or not you fed the hungry and, brought the thirsty person a drink. And she's right. She's not wrong about it at all. But I think that's helpful for kids, and just that sort of the way that she's kind of defiant in a sense. There's a way that she's just like, I can't do it anybody else's way. I just have to do it this way. And she's so mad about how so many Christians are just too relaxed about helping people who are suffering. And it's like, some people are like, I don't know, you've got like Basil the Great, right? He's like, oh, let's help all the people. And he loves everyone and he's giving sermons about how you should help. Mother Maria is just mad. Like, she's just like, I can't believe I'm the only one doing this, but she just keeps doing it. There's just there's so much to love about that. And it might be frustrating if we were there with her in person, I would imagine, but there's so much beauty in it. And it's so relatable in so many ways. I think especially during our teenage years when we're pretty sure everybody else is wrong and we're right.
Right.
She had a lot of that going on.
Yes.
But she was cool.
And
she was a woman mayor too. Like, come on. She's cool.
Yep.
She's neat.
And that's one of the reasons that I chose the title that I did, because I'm like, I tell my daughter all the time, I'm like, Lydia, the one thing you really got from me is being stubborn. And I'm like, but I'm more stubborn than you, so I will win. But like, Mother Maria was stubborn, right? Like, you don't do the things she does if you're not stubborn and strong-willed enough to get it done. So I'm like, being stubborn is not a bad thing, right? Absolutely. You can use it for bad things, but you can also do wonderful, amazing things with it.
Well, and Stubborn Love is written primarily for younger audiences, right? Like, you've aimed it so that it's good for like a middle school, high school kids, but I would say maybe even upper elementary. If they're good readers, they would probably be into it too. But I feel like as an adult, it's also really good, and especially for adults, especially like parents who are really busy and are like, I haven't finished a book in years. Like, this is cool because you can finish it, because it's like the first section is her life story, right? And then you have a bunch of her quotes, which are really, she was really profound. She's really neat.
Yes.
Like, seems like in person she was kind of brusque, but in writing she was just super eloquent. And then, of course, you have this whole section where it sort of turns around and asks you, what, who are you, and how do you react to this, and how does your life change? It's so cool. It's a really neat book. It's really great, Rita. I think it turned out so well. Did the kids at your church read it at all? Has anybody who studied it with you seen it and said, yep, it's good?
So I haven't gotten feedback yet. I know lots of people bought it when it was released, but I haven't gotten any response yet. Well, from kids. I've gotten lots of adults that have breezed through and, they're like, this is amazing. And part of it was I didn't really tell anybody I was doing it. So it was a secret, not really a secret, but it wasn't really announced until it came out. So yeah, but
that's cool though. That's very cool. Well, I'm sure they're going to love it. And I feel like they're going to try to take a little credit for it. They'll be like, well, if you hadn't taught us, if you hadn't had that group, I guess this would never have happened.
Which is true. It is. Yep.
It is true.
They're amazing kids. They're really great kids.
That's so neat. Well, Rita, thank you so much. I'm so glad you wrote this, first of all. When, we talked about it a couple years ago, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. Go for it. And I'm just so glad that you did it, because it's just beautiful. It's really, really well done. So I'm going to put a link on the show's Facebook page to Stubborn Love, and it'll be probably on the archived episode. We'll have it in the show notes. So if you go on the app or on YouTube, as I smack my microphone, we'll have the link, but it's just at store.ancientfaith.com. You can find Stubborn Love, and you're going to like it. You're going to want to read it with your kids, and then you're going to want to read it with your friends, and you're going to like it a lot. But so Rita, thank you so much for coming on the program. This has been just completely delightful.
Thank you for having me on. It was wonderful to talk to you again.
Great. Absolutely great. And again, holding it up for the camera, Stubborn Love. It's really good. I'm so happy about it. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our audience. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we'll see you next week with another Everyday Orthodox Christian. Good night, guys.